Hello, my name is Braden Holberg, and today I will be giving a speech on A Room of One's Own, a speech given by Virginia Woolf. Imagine not being able to decide your education, your money, or your property. This is something that women faced for centuries, and when they got fed up with it, they started the women's rights movement. Virginia Woolf was born in 1882 in Kensington, London, England, in the United Kingdom. She was born into a blended family of 8 kids, half of which were boys. This was a big deal because her father decided that only the males in her family could go into public or private schooling. The women in this family were not allowed to get any further education other than their household education, such as sewing classes or learning how to write in cursive. This meant that Virginia had to go out and receive her own education. And this led her to being an author of many books and eventually getting published and furthering up her education and speaking at larger groups of college students and giving lectures. She gave lectures at Cambridge and Oxford. This is when her speech, A Room of One's Own, started to flourish and became a huge feminist manifesto. Today I'll be discussing A Room of One's Own, a speech given by Virginia Woolf. And this actually is a book of many of her lectures, but I'll be discussing this particular one. In this speech, I'll be discussing her speech, and we'll be talking about the impact that she had on younger people and how that still impacts us today, as well as analyzing her speech and talking about the problems, the causes, and the solutions that she had for women's rights movements and young writers. A preview of my main points. The first thing I will be discussing is the problems that Virginia writes about in her speech and different quotes from that. And then I will be talking about her causes and the solutions that she talks about in her speech. And finally, I'll be talking about the impact that she has on today. This is a picture of Virginia right here as a young lady, and this is a picture of the time period when she was starting to become most popular in 1928, when this speech was written. The main problem that she talks about in her speech is that young women are not given an outlet of creativity in their homes. She even states that she believes that women should have their own money and their own private rooms in order to even write fiction novels, such as what she did. She said, she also talks about how young women were not given the opportunity to become published authors, as many of the women this time went under male pen names, and she believes that, and this is a quote from her, "I would venture to guess that a nun, a person who wrote so many poems without signatures, was often a woman." She believed that women had to go under certain names or not claim their work because of the male stipulations that were given to them, such as male publishers saying what they can and cannot write. She believed that literature is a strew and with the wreckage of who have minded beyond reason that the opinions of others, meaning that the women during this time cared so much about the opinions of the males that they weren't, their opinions were shut down a little bit and weren't allowed to fully express themselves. This is a picture of her book that this particular lecture comes from, and this is her giving lectures. The causes of this were that many of them weren't given the rights to protect them from the male publishers denying what was their own opinions in their writing. This meant that the male publisher could be like, "Nope, I'm taking that away from you, you can't write about that," and didn't allow them to truly express how they felt about things. She even states that through her own work, "The truth had run through my fingers and every drop escaped." She writes this in a beautiful way, describing how the truth would slip away from them. Their own personal truths weren't allowed to be fulfilled or have been read in public. So even her own work was dampened or critiqued and was stripped of her own opinions. She also states that women have served all of these centuries as a looking glasses possessing the magic and delicious power of making the men look better. This essentially was saying that women were viewed as objects to make their husband look better, which meant that they couldn't have their own opinions necessarily, or they weren't valued as high as the men's are. This goes into women starting to, in order to express themselves and share their opinions, they had to go under male pen names. And this was also during the women's rights movement in England. And here are some political cartoons. This one shows a woman being tied up and not being given a voice. And this one is a woman also being cut, her mouth is covered again, and being torn apart by society, telling her basically what she should be and whether or not she could vote. Another one of these causes is that the male publishers didn't want the fictional characters of the women to be written as too masculine or adventurous, or they had certain stipulations of what they particularly wanted those to be. Oh, looks like my slides got a little mixed. Oh, these are some female authors that I found that went under certain pen names. Alice Mary Norton went under Andre Norton. Alice Bradley Sheldon went under James Tiptree Jr. I'm going to skip a couple. The Bronte sisters went under Currier Acton and Ellis Bell, and these women were famous for writing the book Jane Eyre, which actually has a very powerful young woman in their story, which is unusual, but they were known to be written by men and not necessarily by women. Mary Ann Evans, who was actually George Eliot, wrote tons of theological statements. And this goes with what Woolf is saying about having to hide who you really are. Your truth is slipping out of your fingers and not being able to fully express women's opinions. Here's a picture of George Eliot. And Louisa May Alcott, or A.M. Brannard, was the woman who wrote Little Women, who had to go under a male name to write a book about her sisters. And yeah, it's crazy. So the solution that she found, at least what I'm viewing from reading this, is that women need to advocate for other women as if it is their job. She states in her speech, anything may happen when womanhood has ceased to be a protected occupation. What she's saying is that it is a duty as a woman to protect the rights of other women as well. Building this group together can create a more creative and working together atmosphere that builds protection for them that they didn't have at this point in time. There is, as she states, there is no gate, no lock, no bolt that can hold you from your creative freedom. That's not the direct quote, but she does state that even though these pressures may be put together, women can stick together and build something that is greater than what any man could ever have thought during this time that would happen. And as the author George Eliot, or Mary Ann Evans, states, I am neither a man nor a woman, but an author. Virginia Woolf's purpose of this lecture is saying that it doesn't matter what gender you are, that your opinion and your creative outlet needs to be expressed. Being able to be given the money and the room that you need to create and write fiction. The impact that Virginia Woolf has on today's society is pretty clear. She started this creative outlet that we all need to listen to, even today. Virginia Woolf advocated for women's rights movement And this helped inspire fellow authors to come out and say, I'm a woman and I wrote these books, which is extremely important because we don't know how many books could have been written by women and we have no idea. And this also furthered developments in education. In 2017, 72 female high school students enrolled for college classes, and which is different than the 68% of men that enrolled in college classes. This is a substantial increase in women's education and showing us that we really are women really are furthering themselves up and creating an impact, and we're inspiring other countries to do so as well. Malala, as some of you may have heard her name, fought for her country's rights to women's education and was shot down because of it, because they knew how inspiring she was starting to be. Although Virginia Woolf didn't see the end of this problem, really stating, women and fiction remain, but so far as I am concerned, it's an unsolved problem. We may never finally get to the end of where we won't have to fight for this, but as long as we do, women will continue to fight for their education. In conclusion today, I talked about Virginia Woolf's speech and how much it had an impact. We talked about the problems and the solution that it has, and how we are still affected by her words to this day and how powerful they can be, and how her speeches inspired younger authors and plenty more people to come out and say, this is my writing and I am proud of it. And so again, in the speech I talked about all those things and why is it important and how it is still specific to this day. And in my closing remarks, what I have to say is, remember those who fought for what we have today. We now have the ability the freedom to write what we want and to speak our minds. And as Virginia Woolf stated, there is no gate, no locks, no bolts that you can put on my freedom and of my mind. Thank you.